There is something inside you that already knows, has known for weeks, perhaps for months. While your conscious mind still pretends your life is working, a much older, quieter part has already begun demolishing from within the version of yourself you believe you are. Most people come across a video like this and think it was a coincidence of the algorithm, that the phone listened to a conversation, that it was chance. But Carl Jung understood something colder than any technical explanation. Nothing you are seeing right now reached you by accident. There is a specific psychological mechanism, documented, observed in clinical practice for decades, that places a person before certain information 3, 5, 7 days before a point of internal rupture. You did not find this video. It was summoned by something inside you that can no longer bear to keep pretending. Jung observed over more than 40 years of clinical listening that the human psyche operates on two levels that almost never speak to each other amicably. There is the conscious, that superficial layer that plans, postpones, justifies itself, and convinces itself it is still in control. And there is the unconscious, a deep, archaic structure that registers everything the daytime mind refuses to look at directly. While you are distracted by bills, deadlines, unanswered messages, and the next meeting, the unconscious is doing something far more important than any task on your agenda. It is measuring how much your current life still corresponds to who you are. And the moment that measurement reaches a certain critical point, it begins to move pieces, not dramatically, surgically. That is why certain encounters feel too charged to be mere coincidence. A phrase overheard in a bakery line, a book that falls off the shelf, a video that appears on your screen exactly on the night you could not sleep. It is not magic. It is not fate. It is the unconscious reorganizing the environment around you so that you are forced to see what you were avoiding seeing. Jung called this phenomenon significant apparition, and it is not mystical romanticism, it is observable psychology. Most people interpret these signs as luck, thank the universe, and go on living exactly as before. But there is a minority, and chances are you are part of it, that perceives something different. A slight unease, a discomfort of recognition, as if what was being said were not new information, but a memory the soul had forgotten. It is not intuition. It is the unconscious confirming what it has known for a long time. You are no longer the person who is living this life. The second sign appears when the things that once held your life together from the inside begin to lose their strength. It is not depression. It is not a crisis that can be named in a doctor's office. It is something quieter and more definitive. The work that once gave you purpose starts to feel like a rehearsed script. The conversations that nourished you begin to sound like copies of themselves. The people remain the same, the scenarios remain the same, but something inside you has already moved out of place. And because you cannot name what has changed, you start to blame yourself. You think you are ungrateful, selfish, difficult. You think you need to try harder to love again what no longer sustains you. It is not a lack of gratitude. It is identity displacement. Jung understood this phenomenon in a very specific way. He said that psychic energy doesn't disappear, it shifts. When an old identity fulfills its function, the unconscious withdraws the emotional investment from it and moves that energy somewhere else, almost always toward a version of yourself that doesn't yet exist, but that is already being built in the dark. What you feel as emptiness is this: the silent exit of a version of yourself that has already expired. It's not that life has gotten worse, it's that you've stopped being useful to that life. And most people treat this moment as a problem to be solved. They double down. They work more. They drink more. They post more. They fake enthusiasm in photos, reply, "Everything's great" in messages, accept invitations that no longer make sense, schedule trips to places where they still feel like strangers inside their own bodies. They do everything to revive an internal corpse, because no one taught them that some deaths are not tragedies, they are passages. You are not stuck. You are being demolished from within so that something more coherent can be raised on the same ground. If you reach this point, and something inside your chest recognized all of this as if it were the exact description of your last week, you are not here by accident. That's why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. It's the missing map to navigate this internal dismantling without destroying yourself in the process. a structured 60-day journey through Carl Jung's psychology, with one lesson per day, surgical questions, keys for inner reading, declarations, and micro-actions that pull you out of paralysis and return your sense of direction. Each lesson is a key. Each day is a step inside your own psyche. And at the end, what remains is not an improved version of who you were. It's the person who was waiting for you to stop pretending. The link is in the first pinned comment right below this video. If you understood what Jung is saying through what you just heard, write a single comment. I am ready to cross over. This is a symbolic commitment to who you are about to become. After psychic energy begins to withdraw from the old life, the environment around you starts to behave strangely. Not strangely in a supernatural sense, strangely in the sense of being too organized to be random. You think of someone you haven't seen in 10 years, and they appear in your feed the next day. You formulate a question in your mind that you never knew how to ask, and someone, in an ordinary conversation, hands you the answer as if reading from a script. A song plays in a public place right at the lyric that describes what you couldn't say to yourself. A number repeats, a name repeats, a symbol repeats, and little by little, a feeling settles inside. That reality is sending you open letters. Jung named this synchronicity, and this is where most people misunderstand the concept. They think synchronicity is the universe conspiring in your favor. It isn't. Synchronicity is not a telegram from the future. It is a mirror of the present. It exposes what your deep mind already knows, but what your conscious mind still refuses to admit. When you start noticing patterns everywhere, that doesn't mean the universe changed. It means your perception has sharpened, because a part of you, the part that was asleep under layers of routine, has just woken up. You are seeing what was always there. Only now you have the internal structure to see it. The dangerous thing is that many people experience this moment with fascination and stop there. They go around collecting signs like someone collecting stamps, without understanding that the sign is not the message. The sign is a request for a response. Synchronicity without action becomes intimate folklore. You become that person who speaks in a low voice about the universe while your life remains exactly the same. And there is a huge difference between waking up and merely being entertained by your own awakening. What Jung said is cold and uncomfortable. Every meaningful coincidence is a summons. It's the psyche asking what you're going to do with what you can no longer ignore. And it's when you start answering those questions that the next door opens. The one almost no one wants to walk through. The door that leads inward. There is a monster that lives inside you. I'm not using a cheap metaphor for impact. Jung was very literal when he spoke of this. He called this monster the shadow, and defined the shadow as everything you had to bury inside yourself in order to be accepted, loved, approved of, or simply not to be abandoned by people you depended on emotionally when you were still a child. Your legitimate anger that you called an overreaction, your ambition that you called arrogance, your sexual desire that you called shame, your boundary that you called selfishness, your truth that you called rudeness, your desire to disappear that you called ingratitude. Each of these things was buried alive inside you, and the problem is that things buried alive continue to exist. They just stop moving on the surface. Beneath, they keep moving and they leak. They leak as unjustified tiredness in the middle of the afternoon, as disproportionate irritation with people who didn't do anything serious, as sabotage at the exact moment when life was about to work out, as romantic choices that repeat in a cycle even after years of therapy, as that strange feeling of watching your own life instead of living it. All true change begins here, not in the beautiful phase of transformation, not in the inspiring phase. It begins the moment you have the courage to look into your own psychic backyard and ask without alibi, how many corpses did I bury here in the name of being loved? The person who pretends not to have a shadow is the same person who projects the shadow onto everyone. It's that person who perceives others' flaws with surgical precision, but never their own. It's that person who shouts at the world what they refuse to heal inside their own home. And Jung said something devastating about this. What you do not integrate within yourself, you repeat in your destiny. The encounter with the shadow is not beautiful. It doesn't come with background music and motivational phrases. It comes with embarrassment, It comes with retroactive guilt. It comes with nights when you remember things you said, choices you made, people you hurt, and you understand with terrible clarity that much of what you blamed the other for doing, you yourself were doing underneath, disguised with good manners. But it is precisely here, in this unbearable discomfort, that transformation stops being theory and becomes flesh. And if you're reading this and felt a tightness in your throat, the Code of Awakening was built precisely to cross this layer, not with surface-level self-help. With Jungian clinical structure, 1 lesson per day, 60 days, so you can look at what you buried without destroying yourself in the process. The link is in the first pinned comment. You already understand what needs to be done. The decision to go down there is yours, and it must be made today. After you cross through the shadow, a very strange thing happens. You stop recognizing your own life. It's not dramatic, it's awkward. You look at your circle of friends and no longer feel hungry to be there. You look at your profession and it seems like a play you kept performing out of politeness. You look at your way of loving, your way of negotiating, your way of laughing, and realize that almost all of it was assembled to please someone you no longer even know who it is. And at the same time, the new version of you hasn't arrived yet. You're between two houses with a key to neither. Jung called this space liminal territory. Anthropologists call it the threshold. You can call it a psychological purgatory. It is the most misunderstood phase of transformation because it doesn't look like transformation. It looks like paralysis. It looks like depression. It looks like your life has stalled. But it hasn't stalled. It is in suspension. Think of a caterpillar. When it enters the cocoon, it doesn't slowly become a butterfly. It becomes soup first, literally. Enzymes dissolve almost all of the previous structure before the new one can form. If someone opens a cocoon in the middle of the process, they don't find a half-beautiful creature. They find liquid chaos, and that is exactly what it feels like to be in a liminal space. You are liquid chaos, trying to pretend you still have a form for others. Most people can't stand this period and make a desperate choice. They rush back to the old life, rekindle the relationship that had already died, accept the job offer they know is a step backward, resume friendships that had already ended for legitimate reasons, buy objects they don't want, throw parties they don't feel like, accept labels that no longer fit, all to avoid feeling the emptiness of non-identity. And the price for this is extremely high. You amputate the new version of yourself before it can be born. Jung was clear about this. He said that empty space is not an absence of life. It is the raw material of new life. But it demands one thing that almost no one wants to give: patience without guarantee. You need to keep walking through a tunnel where the old identity no longer fits you, but the new one is still being sewn together backstage. You need to learn to exist without a sign, without a label, without a psychological resume. It is not a pause, it is a gestation. And it is during this gestation that the last great adversary emerges, the one that makes most people give up just a few steps from the shore. When the new version begins to organize itself within you, something predictable happens. The old version panics. It smells its own end, and like any living structure, it fights to keep existing, even if its existence no longer makes sense. This struggle is called resistance, and it doesn't appear as a clear voice saying don't change. It appears in a much smarter way than that. It appears as a sudden crisis of doubt on the very day you were about to take the step. It appears as a strange tiredness when you sit down to start reading. It appears as a pointless argument with someone close, right in the week you were beginning to see clarity. It appears as sleepiness at the wrong time, distraction at the wrong moment, elegant procrastination disguised as common sense, self-sabotage disguised as prudence, and it appears above all as fear. But here is the inversion Jung made, and it changes everything. The fear before a true leap is not a sign that you are going the wrong way. It is the noise of the old version realizing it is about to cease to exist. Fear is not an alarm. It is a funeral in real time. Most people interpret that fear as a warning and stop. They retreat. They go back to the box that no longer fits. They renegotiate with the old life for a few more years of mediocre survival. And then they wonder, at 50, at 60, at 70, why they feel that silent tightness when they look back. That tightness has a name. It is called the unlived life. It is the sum of all the leaps the old version stopped you from taking. You are not afraid because change is dangerous. You are afraid because change is real. And whoever understands that stops negotiating with themselves, stops waiting for the perfect moment, stops waiting to feel like it, acts before courage arrives because they have understood that courage does not come first. Courage is the name given to the act performed despite fear. And that is why this is the moment when the decision must be made. Not tomorrow, not when you feel lighter, not when things settle down, because the next time you open a video like this, that tightness in your chest may already have been numbed by another week of routine. The awakening code is in the first pinned comment. 60 days, 1 lesson per day, a structured Jungian path for you to get through everything this video has opened inside you without getting stuck in the middle of the tunnel. The responsibility for what happens from now on is no longer the algorithms, no longer chances, no longer destinies. It is yours. You saw, you recognized, you understood. Now there are only 2 paths. Scroll down to the first comment and start today, or close this video and pretend for another year that you didn't know. Jung gave a very specific name to the end of this process. He called it individuation. It is not enlightenment. It is not material success. It is not the stage in life where everything magically resolves. Individuation is something simpler and rarer than any spiritual promise. It is the moment when you stop outsourcing the authorship of your existence. You stop waiting for permission. You stop translating your truth into a palatable version so as not to bother people who would never do the same for you. You stop justifying yourself to those who decided long ago what you are. You stop apologizing for your ambition, your intensity, your strangeness, your way of being. You begin to inhabit your life in the first person. This does not turn you into someone cold, distant, or arrogant. On the contrary, an individuated person is the most present person there is, because they are no longer spending psychic energy on mask maintenance. All that energy that used to go into performing now goes into living. You start attracting different people because the old ones were attracted by your mask, and the mask has fallen. You start making different decisions because you are no longer choosing in the name of the fear of disappointing. You start to feel a new kind of loneliness, cleaner, that no longer weighs like abandonment but like company with yourself for the first time in your life. And then you understand the coldest phrase Jung ever wrote. He said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. He didn't say it was an option. He said it was a privilege. In other words, something most people go through their entire existence without ever experiencing. They die being the version that others approved of, with the true self in silence, swallowed, under layers and layers of borrowed identity. You have 3 days, maybe less, not because something cosmic is going to happen, but because the window in which the psyche opens never stays open for long. It closes, and when it closes, you go back to sleep. You go back to thinking all of this was just a well-written video. You go back to getting used to it. You go back to numbing yourself. You go back to convincing yourself the discomfort was an exaggeration, that you were tired, that you'll think about it tomorrow with a clearer head. Tomorrow never comes for the old version, it lives on postponed tomorrows. You can close this video now and keep playing the role you learned to play. You can go back to your routine, silence the unconscious for another cycle, push the restlessness to the back of the drawer, and turn on another screen so you don't hear the noise from within. Or you can scroll down to the first pinned comment, open the Código du Despertar, and start today the only work that matters, that of stopping pretending. The choice, as it has always been, is yours. Except that now, you no longer have the right to say you didn't know. The illusion is over.